we're right into it. Definitely we'll start with the intro. So.
All right. Perfect. I think we've started recording, so.
Okay, so I'm going to present, and
I'll just mute myself and my video while you're presenting, but if you want us to intervene, let me know, okay?
okay, can you see my screen?
Still waiting. Might have some lag. Nope. Not there.
Just let it give it a second for it to load.
No, it's a bit weird. It's not launching. Can you maybe try again? Sorry about that. There we go. Now it's working.
Okay, so it popped up. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started. And I think from here, since it's sharing my screen, I've got everything open, so it should flow pretty good. So happy to give the class today. So I titled it Air Power Trends in the Defense Industry because that's my expertise. And doing this under my consulting company, XNS Solutions. So my background, I've been working in the defense industry for 36 years. So, it started off with after high school, going to the United States Military Academy at West Point, where I studied engineering, and I branched into Army aviation. And then so 21 years as an Army aviation pilot, flying various helicopters and doing a variety of positions throughout those 21 years. Most of it in special operations, some in joint senior staff assignments, and then of course the early years in the regular Army, doing kind of conventional regular Army missions, which no need to go into detail on that. But and then when I retired and left my last position, I was professor of military science and leadership at the University of Tennessee, and where I trained for a few years candidates to become officers in the U.S. Army, taught military history as well. And then I was hired into the civilian sector to be a defense contractor for a small company that where I was essentially assigned to the command to do Lean Six Sigma projects, other special activities. I received an MBA before the end of my retirement from the University of Tennessee, and I was able to kind of use as they said, some of the process improvement techniques they focus on in the MBA course to improve aviation maintenance and a variety of other projects for the organization I supported in special operations. And so because of the work there, my background, the Boeing company hired me to be the director of business development for special operations. And I've done that for about 9.5 years now. And I currently work there and then consult on the side as needed, making sure nothing is, I don't share anything proprietary from my company. So I think that qualifies me to really speak to my industry. It's really all I know and all I've done with most of my life. So when I think of air power, because the idea for this course is kind of focused on aerospace, and right now aerospace includes both commercial and defense, and everything that has been developed on either side is usually applicable. So there's times where planes were developed that later made their way into commercial space and vice versa. And these days it's even more important because we're starting to see that with the use of aviation products and artificial intelligence combining. So we will see a future of unmanned flight, and we're at the cusp of this. So, but on the defense side, you kind of look at, the air power and aviation has only been around since the 20th century. So, I will look at, I pulled a couple of articles, and I think I put them in here so people could refer to them and kind of look at these at length. But I'll bring them up. Hopefully I can. There we go. So it's long. I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but the one thing I wanted to highlight is it talks about the nature of war. And so as air power started in the beginning of World War I, and in World War I and II are most devastating wars in the history of the world. In the beginning, there was this idea of unlimited war, and there was a lot of thinkers and strategists at the time that thought they would use bombers to bomb cities into oblivion and cause a country to surrender. So that was their strategy, to eventually build bomber fleets to level cities and cause the civilian population to basically sue for peace and surrender without a land invasion. That theory did not prove true. So, but it did highlight in both world wars, World War I being what is the potential for air power, and then World War II. Really, it was instrumental in how the war progressed. So that eventually the countries that dominated the skies and were able to bomb at will eventually reduced the industrial base of say, the Axis as well as Japan, and the war was won. And then, of course, in spectacular fashion in Japan with the use of nuclear weapons at the very end of the war. So, but then with the advent of nuclear weapons, they're ushered in that new age where you can't really go use total war. And I'm highlighting this history because we're kind of we're in a similar state right now, where we're going to, as a world, there's going to be limits on where we go in the future, or we risk mutually assured destruction, as in the Cold War, because it became apparent early in the Cold War that we could not have a wide nuclear exchange between the Soviet Union and NATO without essentially ending most life on this planet. And so it forced the governments to settle their conflicts when they decided to use force in a limited war. So each war after World War II that the U.S. and many others were involved were kept in a box. So they didn't grow into a total war. They're devastating in the local areas for the people, of course. There's casualties and lots of damage, etc. But at the end of the day, it was limited, and we did not end life on the planet. And even though there was very competing ideologies that seemingly could not coexist. So when the Cold War ended, and this article pretty much only goes and talks through about 2001. And then we, as most everyone knows, in 2001, we had the rise of non-state actors like Al-Qaeda, who were able to engineer, civilian aircraft attacks on targets here in the U.S. And it ushered in this idea that we would wage a limited war to go after non-state actors in whatever country they operated in, and Al-Qaeda being the one in the beginning. And then, of course, that morphed into so many different groups with similar ideologies and hatreds towards, basically the West or other governments. But the whole time, it was kept very limited. So these wars of the last 20-something years were kept in a box, isolated to Afghanistan, to Iraq, to Southeast Asia, to wherever the different things were going on. A lot in Africa in the last 10 years. And they were kept limited, similar to how it was in the Cold War. Okay, so here in the last few years, we've had a wake-up call and what I think leads to the future. And here we have a wonderful article on air power after Ukraine. So the war in Ukraine was quite a shock to Russia, the United States, China, all of the large powers that can actually afford a high-end, very expensive military with high-end fighters, bombers, helicopters, munitions, all these things that you need for a modern Air Force. What it showed is that war is a harsh teacher. What it showed is that a country that no one expected to last more than a month was able to combine modern technology, the use of cheap drones and air defense and basically decentralized tactics to stop an enemy that numerically should have conquered them within a month. And so these events, the war is still ongoing, unfortunately. And you can later go to this and break this out if you're curious, but it allows almost any country to develop a good military power without a huge investment. So again, the nation states like the US and Russia and China no longer are the only ones with the high-end air forces, for example. So now with the advent of cheaper drones and unmanned technologies, you can do what the Ukrainians did, which is almost made airspace in and around Ukraine prohibitive from air power. I mean, they cannot bomb at will. Russia does not have control of the skies. Now we've seen a pullback all the way back to World War I, where we now have trench warfare. We have artillery, long-range artillery from the ground, attacking targets, and whenever thing flies, it's in jeopardy. And we have small, cheap drones with a lot of soldiers operating them, just targeting individual soldiers. So flying around till they find someone and kamikaze and take them out. So as everyone's looking at these things, they're thinking, okay, so war will be more costly. Even limited war is going to be more costly because of these technologies. So what can be done? And how can we use mass, for example? So the high-end, maybe a country has 20 fighters, like F-35 fighters, the most high-end U.S. variant. And, they're so expensive, they're exquisite, but they have the absolute best radar and they're manned. And, but again, you only have, say, 20. So if they can be taken out by, say, 1,000 low-cost drones that they can't possibly shoot down all of them, then that's incredibly cost-effective for an adversary. So, okay, so we'll go back to my chart real quick, make sure I'm not missing things. So again, use of air power in the modern age. So we looked at what kind of some lessons learned briefly on Ukraine. So in my industry, where I've been for 11 years, I've watched these trends. So we'll say 10 years ago, pre-Ukraine, we had drones in the Middle East and in Europe and Pacific and Africa, largely in uncontested airspace, doing observation, watching and reporting, looking for whether it be terrorists or, groups of thugs in Africa that are attacking villages and causing mayhem and trouble. And, they were trying to locate these bad actors, and then they would pass the information to someone to do something about it. And so again, largely uncontested. And uncontested air movements of helicopters, supplies, and airplanes, and very limited strikes being authorized to do any kind of bombing. So it's very limited, very precise. That was kind of the way things were. And then the Ukraine happens. And during this time period, in the last, say, 10, 15 years, AI has been moving at such a fast pace, and drone technology has been moving along with it, so that it's because of the efficiencies, it's become obvious that so many platforms can be automated. And that starts to bring us to where we are today. So without naming the companies, there are several U.S. defense companies that have already turned antiquated airplanes and helicopters into drones. The technology is on the shelf. So they can take virtually anything that flies and have it fly autonomously. So there are some technical hiccups. So again, it can, but there are technical hiccups and there's regulatory hiccups. Okay, so just as an example, several years ago, they took just a regular commercial plane that you could go rent if you had a pilot's license, and they replaced a set of flight controls. And basically, the airplane can fly around U.S. in the airspace without a pilot ever touching the controls. Because of regulations, they had another pilot sitting in the other seat so they could, land if something happened. So the technology exists. So later, and there's various approaches to achieve this. Some, it's all software driven, and you don't even have to move flight controls. So it's what's called optionally man an aircraft. You can man it, and then maybe there's a reason to move supplies in a high threat area, and you don't want any people to die trying to move these supplies. So you just send it in without people. And then as long as it can land at a spot on the ground that's clear of obstacles for the helicopters or a runway for a plane, then you have mission success. So in concept, it works. One of the technical issues is, well, what happens when there's another plane that's about to hit it? Think what happened in Washington recently, where a helicopter was flying under visual flight rules, and an airplane was flying under instrument flight rules, and on talking to air traffic control and doing a normal approach to landing. And the regulatory rules are the pilot that's flying under visual flight rules needs to see and avoid any traffic. And so they thought they might have seen something, but obviously didn't. And there you go, we had an accident. So the idea is, let's just say everything was unmanned and everything was being flown with artificial intelligence technology. So one of the things that's missing is it's not going from point A to point B on a programmed flight plan or route. It is what happens when an unexpected event happens. So it's flying along on its programmed event, and suddenly an aircraft flies right in front of it. Can it take emergency evasive action fast in order not to run into it? And then correct and resume its mission. Okay, so that requires some technologies like that they've kind of developed a little bit for landing in degraded visual environments. For example, like a helicopter landing in a dust out, brown out condition where they can't see the ground. It's cause for a lot of accidents because pilots get spatially disoriented. They hit on the side and roll the helicopter, and that's kind of a bad thing. It's a very difficult maneuver to do to land safely in a complete dust cloud where you can't see anything. But if there was the technology that could see through the dust, see an obstacle, maybe a stump, a tree, something sitting there that no one saw, and then shift and move and land safely. So those are things that are in the works. And so, we're at this stage where the aircraft technically can be automated, similar to like an autopilot that can take off and land on whatever the planned route is. It cannot react to what's happening en route. It cannot react to differences. And that's where, for safety reasons, we would have to have a pilot be able to take it off autopilot and avoid whatever it was and keep it safe. So there's some gaps. Okay, several approaches. I've seen briefings on numerous companies' approaches. So it's in the works. So I think in the next few years we're going to see that become a reality, and it will affect defense because so many defense missions can just be automated. And if you don't have to have a control station, let's say operating a drone, and the drone can operate independently and be shielded for jamming. So then there's all these like anything in the defense sector, there's a mission that you fly, there's a mission to defend against it, whether it be an air defense weapon system or jamming or electronic warfare, you name it. So So those trends will continue. And I think it will continue away from high-end technology to, in terms of manned aircraft, to high-end unmanned aircraft, as well as cheap, low-tech solutions. And in terms of mass, cheap, low-tech solutions and mass will be very, useful for some countries who don't have as much money. And of course, the big countries will have to adopt those same technologies and figure out how to defend against it. So then that takes me to the next kind of link. I'm a member of the National Defense Industrial Association. It's a professional organization, and so I would recommend anyone who's interested in this space, to at least subscribe and start reading, because just in terms of professional journals, basically, if you just stay up with it, you've got all the recent articles, and they will talk about, like, for example, quantum computing, AI, and the cybersecurity model, et cetera, and how to make vehicles safe for roadside bombs. Some of the things for my main customer, the U.S. Special Operations Command, where they think they'll go in the future. Their whole mission is limited war and how to avoid a conflict from becoming a total war. So most everything they do is, as they say, operations left of the initial war starting. So again, different technologies you can see and read about, and whatever's pertinent to what you do, or what your company does, or what you want to be part of, you can help educate yourself and know what different companies are thinking. So the defense customers who are in charge of acquisitions for the U.S., they read those same articles and they come to the same conferences, and that's where there's a lot of collaboration that they're legally allowed to have at those, like say an NDIA conference that's a nonprofit organization that's where government and industry is allowed to come together and work. So that leads us into barriers. This industry is really hard to make sales. So, I'm in business development. My main job is to let the customers know what this new technology we have is, maybe gain their buy-in and resources to help us with research and development. Maybe if we've already built it and it's done, is to try to get them to buy a certain number of them. And it does not happen fast. These are usually multi-year campaigns. So we shape these campaigns through meeting the key, we'll say the key advisors, the key decision makers, where we don't just brief once and then get a decision. It never happens that way. Usually it is multiple briefings, multiple demonstrations, looking at how their budgets are given to them by their defense budget. Do they have the money? Is there a contract vehicle to use? So it's very laborious and it takes a while, because if you don't have everything in your favor along the process, you could have a customer that has a requirement exactly. Let's say your unmanned helicopter. This customer says, this is what we want for the future, and we want 10 of them. Okay, we have them. This is how long it would take us to manufacture, produce, and deliver. This is how much they cost. Great. Okay, so we need to do a contract. Well, we don't have the money. Okay, they have to go to Congress, justify it, and then get budgeted. And then, of course, it depends. And then over time, of course, prices may change. It depends on the contract they choose, but ever since COVID, everything has gone up in price, raw materials, you name it. So the whole sector has gotten way more expensive for a variety of reasons. And most budgets have not kept up with it. So that's a whole different barrier right there. So, and again, defense industry, where it's government spending, because defense industry is very strictly regulated on who you can sell to. And for example, for a U.S. company, I'm restricted from just selling to anyone. I have to have U.S. approval to sell to any non-U.S. organization. So, but if you just think, who are the allies? Typically, the allies and in NATO and other alliances are allowed to buy the similar products. So, okay, so another issue is the opportunities for large and small businesses, and I know Diana's faced this. You know, working with a big company with a lot of bureaucracy and there's a lot of checks and balances is very difficult, because a small business can be agile and fast, and they may have the best technology that's out there. And the process to become a supplier for a large company, I mean, it may take 6 months to a year before you're vetted. And you can absolutely not be added to a contract until you're vetted and through the approved supplier process. So nothing can happen fast with a big company. It's really rare. So especially in defense. So that, because the speed of technology has been going so fast, that is why so many people are frustrated that they're still using archaic technology, even though there's several on the shelf solutions to a lot of their problems, and they don't even take advantage of them. So again, it just takes people being creative and continued effort. It can happen. And usually if you start with there is a requirement that's not being met by some organization, and it makes sense that they should have it for either protecting their forces or being more effective in a conflict, whatever, then you should be able to get it approved eventually. So eventually, if you are persistent as a small company, you can go through, become a supplier, and then have a partnering agreement on a particular product. And there's a host of companies that have done that successfully, that the big companies will reach out to first and said, hey, we want to build this airplane for this service. Okay, there's 30 companies that build parts for this one airplane. So it's not just the main manufacturer like a Lockheed Martin. It is they call it a team. So there's a team of small companies that make different parts. And each one of those has been, let's say an engine has been bid out to engine makers to see who would make the best engine for it. And it all goes into the overall price. So again, so anyone working for a small defense company, there's plenty of opportunity to work with big companies, but there's also advantages to being small and agile, so you can react quicker. So, you know, you just have to decide what's best for the business. So again, I think the last thing I will focus on and then ask some questions is for business development in particular. So some companies call it sales and marketing. My company, my primary company, Boeing, used to call it sales and marketing, and then they changed the title back to business development. Largely, tomato. They were just, it's essentially the same thing. Your job is to, I have keep it sold programs that are already sold that are in various stages of modification, upgrades. They're in the life cycle of an airplane, for example. And then I have capture priorities. So if I look back at one of the links, that the NDIA link, and I know that, say, the Air Force wants to have a new technology for, let's say, cyber security, for example, and I understand what it is, and then I know that we have a division that focuses on that and has software that would be competitive, then I would try to socialize that and be sure and make sure I know the right people that would be the ones that decide to give us all a request for proposal. And so I know if we were able to even compete with that, and then I would shape it to say, hey, we're in this, and when it comes time, this is what we would like to see. And everyone does the same thing. And eventually when the proposal's written, we all in industry respond. And then there's a down select. Maybe there's demonstrations, etc. And this could happen over years. And that's just one product. And I probably have 20 different ones that are in some stage of, we think this is a good idea for one particular military organization. It's in some stage of business capture. And occasionally, something that's unsuccessful. I had a product a few years ago that we all thought perfectly met the needs of one of the organizations, and as well as could be used by certain international partners based on the wars they're fighting. But again, even though largely it seemed perfect to meet the requirement, never went anywhere. So the people involved just didn't want to use the system. And a few years go by, the war in Ukraine happens, and now suddenly the product is in vogue, even though it's been on the shelf for years, and we stopped applying any engineering dollars to modernize or do anything with it. But now suddenly it's like, wait a minute, that was on the shelf years ago. We told you needed it. So again, sometimes the old things that weren't successful and you weren't able to really get any traction come back because conditions out there change. So okay, I think I know this was scheduled for, I think, to go to 10:45. So I've got 10:37 Eastern, and so I'll go ahead and stop sharing. Come back.
Hello, how are you doing? Thank you so much for the presentation. Great stuff. So, well, I guess Mohammed is not here, but I just wanted to, if we show this in the program, just for people to kind of have an idea who you are. Sorry, I should have done that introduction. So, Danny Kelly, Business Development Director, SOI Programs at Boeing with Operational Planning. I see you have a black belt, very nice. So SO programs for 9 years. I see that you are also a department head in military science and leadership, University of Tennessee. So you have quite a bit of teaching experience, huh? And also U.S. Army Special Operations Aviation Officer for 10 years, and then previously also Aviation Officer for 8 years. Did I get most of this correctly, would you say?
Oh, yes. I put the highlights on my LinkedIn, so it's accurate enough.
Brilliant. Yeah, so amazing career. I guess a lot of the people watching this would love to try to walk, in your shoes, and let's see how that looks like in the future. And you made some very interesting points about the war in Ukraine and the use of drones and remote teleoperation. So one thing that we try to help people doing the defense module is to help them orient themselves within the field of defense. What kind of knowledge do they need to have? Now, what kind of training? I see you've done a lot of military training, but also, I guess, combat training as well. And we had a conversation with someone else about that, with Keith. This is an interesting topic to me. Do you think people, first of all, need to have military experience and combat training and physical training before entering a career in defense, would you say?
I would say it helps you understand the requirements to a degree, because a lot of people, they may be in the military and basically have a job similar to working for Amazon. They're in a warehouse and they're moving boxes, or they're putting gas in something. So depending on what someone does, they're moving, and typically these jobs are done really right out of high school. They're initial entry jobs. You don't have a lot of responsibilities, but again, you're doing your job, and you have what you know. Maybe you drive a truck, maybe you're in the infantry, and you know what you know, your one job. And then if they serve a long time, they'll have lots of jobs. You may start out, well, I'm in an infantry squad, but later I decided to go to school and get commissioned, and now I work in the medical service field, and you have a variety of different positions. So it would help you in defense if your military job translates to what you're doing in defense. For example, for me, with the bulk of my career in special operations, me coming to be the director of reaching out to special operations units made perfect sense. No one else would have been able to do the job because they didn't have the experience in the special ops units. And part of that was they're very tribal, so they don't want to talk to anyone who hasn't been where they've been. And that creates another barrier. but it doesn't mean you can't. It just means you need one guy like me, for example, because everyone else hasn't done that. All these other people, like the lady I brought in yesterday she runs a factory for us in Philadelphia. She's never been in the military. She had an engineering degree and has worked her way through engineering. Has been super successful in defense the whole time, manufacturing defense aircraft, doing business development for these aircraft. And I have worked with her many times over the years, and now she's a senior executive in Boeing. Never been in the military, but she has learned and then partnered with those in the company that helped open the door, for example, me, who say, yes, this is the smartest lady we have. She can literally answer any question in detail you have. And that's the truth. And so I would bring her into these meetings and essentially vouch for her and say, this person is really 100 other people I wouldn't even bring to meet you, but this person I would. And then she can take it from there. And then she develops the relationships from there and establishes her professionalism and her knowledge, at what she does. So I would say anyone can work in this field. There's just there's things you can do just to educate yourself. Just something as simple as, learning about the service you support. Let's say you're supporting the U.S. Air Force. Well, read about the history of the U.S. Air Force, and then read the military history of what they've actually done, and then stay abreast of current news. And then if that's your focus, if you understand how they use this equipment and the requirements, you can do that without having been in the Air Force, because it's an intellectual exercise. So, I would say just take an interest in the field. And so many military people, because it's not a catch-all. I don't know everything about every possible military job or organization. I just know what I experienced, and my jobs are related to what I experience. But I have branched out into other areas in my current job that I had no experience in, like software. I did nothing with software, but I've had to work on several software development projects to provide my input. And that's been new for me, but it's, my military experience did not relate at all to that. So I would say it can help, but it's not required.
I see. Yeah, very interesting. We're going to think about how we can implement some kind of physical training in that. And yeah, I guess going from the military training that you had, which is very solid, just curious, how you entered the industry, what brought you into Boeing, from what you can say, of course. But I'm sure you can talk about your own experience. What motivated you to go towards Boeing? What kept you in? And, what do we recommend for people? A lot of our students have an aerospace engineering background or typically an engineering background and are interested in lifelong careers in aerospace and defense. And one thing that we're trying to combat, pun intended, is the gig economy, right? We have a generation now that is very much drawn towards this, short-term gigs rather than lifelong meaningful careers, right? So we're trying to learn from you how we can better achieve that in the future.
So I would say I've thought of my professional life in chapters. So I have, the military chapter, and then now the defense industry chapter as a civilian. And so early on, I had this desire to be a soldier. And from the time I was, let's say, as a kid, when I would read books and watch science fiction movies or read books, I wanted to be that person. So I wanted to say, I don't want to just read about the person flying and doing those missions. I want to actually figure out how to do it in my reality. And so that drove me to go through all the processes to become selected and to be that, we'll say, try to be that hero that I looked up to as a kid and do those things for real. And so, but once I achieved all of those things and was able to, say, test myself in war and do all these things that I had envisioned, I really want to be part of something like that and prove that I can, measure up. At some point, you can go, you go to war enough for so many years, you pretty much check the block. There's just more of the same, and you might not make it back. So you're like, all right, well, I can't do this forever, and what do I do next? And so then I will say my MBA course, which was at a university, I was there's only 2 or 3 veterans of the 60 people in the course, and the other people were in all kinds of different fields, progressing in their careers. And I was able to work with my classmates and just really get exposed to how everything works out there in companies and across numerous fields, and what their heartaches were and what they were dealing with. And I really learned a lot, but I did learn, for me, I didn't want to leave. It was more comfortable to go to the defense industry where I already had knowledge. And I was going to work with people who already recognized what I had done before and knew the difference. So it was an easier transition. It was I felt less like the fish out of water trying to go to an organization, and I don't even speak the language anymore. And, you just don't feel like going into anything you used to do. So this was, I think, comfort. It was more comfortable to go defense. And so my first job was a wonderful job, and I loved it. Probably would have stayed there because it was the old special ops unit I had been a commander in and a pilot. And I really liked just helping and being everyone's, supporter and friend. I didn't have to be in charge of the folks. I didn't have to deploy. So everything I did was to help them be more efficient. And but Boeing offered me the job for more money and more responsibility. And I like the idea of working for a company that has been around so long and done all these things. And I was interested in learning about space and other activities that we were part of, kind of expanding my knowledge base and being challenged. So I took that opportunity, and since then I've had opportunities to change companies a few times, but I looked at it like changing companies it's doing the same thing, just a different company. So if you like who you work with and you like who you work for and you support in general the overall mission, what's the reason for change? A small amount of money, if you don't need that money to do whatever, really doesn't. I mean, is that worth it? It may be yes for someone, but I entered this later in my life and it wasn't. So I feel like it's I like the people I work with and who I work for. So it's challenging enough. I am getting to the point where I'm ready to make a transition because it's been long enough. I just don't. My timeline keeps sliding right for what that's going to be. So we'll see. But I do think there's value to staying with a company, provided they're treating you well. If they're letting you grow and develop and they're giving you projects and you feel valued, and the people around you, are people you like working with, and it's not a toxic environment or something like that, or harassing environment or anything like that. It's a positive, good working environment. Then it's okay. Is the income appropriate for someone with my skill and expertise? And if it's in the ballpark, then it's the other factors come into play. So I would say for them, I wouldn't shy away from working for, go to SpaceX, work for SpaceX. I don't know how they treat their people, but maybe it'll be good. But if SpaceX doesn't work out, you can go over to, Blue Origin and see how Jeff Bezos treats his people, and, or then maybe Boeing or whoever. But each company has a little bit different culture. And I think it changes with different leaders over time. And every company is multi-generational. So, and that's the thing. I mean, I'm a Generation X guy, so we have a certain attributes, I think. And we've got, everyone from, I guess, alphas are just now entering the workforce, I think maybe.
Yeah. This is also an interesting point with generations. And I wanted to ask you how this works, because like I said, we're trying to help people that are now Gen Z, basically, right, to enter the workforce and pretty much step, in your footsteps. And helping them do that is interesting. For example, I'm guessing when you applied to your first aerospace company, I can see that you have a real interest in what you were doing and in working with people who are like yourself, which makes a lot of sense. But the second part is, I think most Gen Z members, if they go now on LinkedIn and they look at a position at Boeing or Airbus, they will probably find 100, 200 applicants for the same position. And this is the problem with social media, right? So, and then I spoke to other people who are closer to you and asked them, how do you hire people? How do you recruit people? They would say, I actually go to conferences and I interact with them. And if I like them, I offer them a job. So really curious how this works. Would you say it's more network-based? Is it more applying online? Is it a combination?
I think for it, it's a combination, because one, like we had a huge, we lost 15% of our workforce last year. There was all these issues. And so we had a hiring freeze, but then recently we were able to rehire a person who left the company in a key position. And so most of us knew this was coming, but it hadn't been officially released. So within our network of people that we know that we knew would be great candidates, we already gave them the heads up. Hey, this position is opening up. I don't know if you're thinking about it, but I think you'd be a great candidate. And when it actually drops officially, you need to like click on it on LinkedIn or wherever you find it, and then do the application process that everybody does. And so there might be 100 applicants for that position, but let's say the person I thought would be great for it went ahead and applied. So they're one of the 100. And then it comes to the board of people responsible to pick, well, who gets interviewed. So we might usually pick like, I don't know, 5, 8 people to do interviews and fly them wherever, or however we're going to do it virtually, and then do an interview process. And then there will be people selected that they're going to work for and with that are part of the hiring board along with an HR person. And so the trick is getting to the interview, because if you never get to the interview, you're screened out. Absolutely. And so that's where you have to look at the job requirement. Your skills and what you submit have to match that very highly. And if you want to make, again, because I couldn't get a person interviewed that doesn't match the job. So I can't, no company, I think, does that responsibly, to say, I need a person that has these attributes and this one doesn't have any of them, I'm just going to hire them. That doesn't happen if it's most companies. But if the persons have all the attributes, then sure, they're qualified. Then that extra validation from someone already in the company actually helps. That gets you to the interview process. So your record and everything you submit is either so perfect that you're better than everyone, all the other 100 people that applied. You know, you have a PhD. No one that doesn't call for a PhD, but you have all these attributes. This person is like overqualified for it. Then you may not know anyone that get called in to interview. But for the rest that are kind of similar, that's what gets you in, especially entry. You know, for these folks coming out of college, there's a ton of people coming out of colleges with the same degree. So then it's and probably a very similar resume and background. So then it's, do I know someone who can maybe help tell me a little bit about it, tell me about the company, maybe is there a process for them to give me a recommendation? And I've done that for several people who found a job rec. I gave them a phone call, we talked about it, and then I went into the system and did like a recommendation that hopefully would help. And in a few cases, they got called to the interview and they hit it out of the park and they got hired. So again, I would say, even back when I was applying, when I was leaving the military, I went through the process, and gosh, it was so frustrating. You know, you apply 100 different companies when you seemingly have the right skill sets, but the one that hired me was people knew of me, knew my reputation. When I talked to them, they said, "Okay, well, we're going to interview you. Otherwise,
This sounds so commonsensical and so logical, because I think we live in an age where a lot of people apply to many things. There are even
Yeah.
AI bots that just apply to hundreds of jobs, and that kind of fills up the list. But as
Right.
you say, I think the people that are even screened even before interviews are the ones that, first
Yeah.
of all, have really good alignment for the job, but also have a network. So it's
Right.
basically alignment and network that you're
Yeah.
mentioning.
So I think if, you could, let's say, like if I was going to want to work for Bell Helicopter, I would go on my LinkedIn and I would put in Bell and I would find, okay, who of my contacts work for Bell? And then I would reach out to them and talk to them about it and say, hey, I have this job rec. Could you tell me anything about it? I mean, what do you think? You know me, would I be a good fit? And then you can build it that way. And then maybe there's a way for them to assist in an ethical way. So.
Yeah, of course. And that and internship programs. I mean, we're trying to find internship programs for students also, at PSA or similar agencies. If Boeing has that, if I were, for example, a graduate of aerospace engineering, and let's say I did this at a great university in Dubai or Abu Dhabi, and if I wanted to get into Boeing or Thales or Airbus, I would probably try to find someone at a junior level, have a little chat with them and understand, how I can even get there. I probably wouldn't dare to go to someone as senior as yourself, but I would probably try to speak to someone at that level and also kind of remain within the network. What we're seeing a lot is people also wanting to move from one side of the planet to another, and also in a very different position from where they are. And this is not always realistic, I think.
No, it isn't. It isn't realistic because there's so many better qualified. So that's the thing. But I would say it doesn't hurt to reach out to people at any level. I mean, the worst that can happen is they just don't want to talk to you. But most people are nice. I think that if you reach out and you're nice and polite, and they try to make the time to help people. I was surprised because I got a lot of help from people I reached out to that I did not know very well, and they took the time and just tried to help and to give advice, to mentor. And I mean, it is flattering if someone wants you to help mentor and coach them. So, and it's a way to give back and it's a way to help. So I would just say, not to hesitate to reach out to people and then just see. I mean, probably about one or two people a week, I end up scheduling something. I just find me on LinkedIn and I try to screen a little bit to make sure they're realistic. Usually maybe somebody has recommended they talk to me or something, and it's enough of a screen that this isn't something that's a scam or something. But yeah, I would say it's okay to reach out for help. I think when you're really trying to shift into a different role altogether, it's really hard. I mean, you can apply to internships, and most companies have something on a website, some process, and ours are very difficult. I would love to be able. There's a few times I've been able to influence the hiring of interns, but it is a laborious, difficult process in our company. So.
For sure.
Yeah, because what they've done is they've targeted certain universities, and that's who they have already with the universities and their programs. So they kind of already have a relationship. So those are going to get preference because of the company's relationship to their aerospace program, for example, and things like that. So it would be hard for me to influence that. And I've had success, but it was such a difficult process to get to work around the system. So that's only happened a couple of times in 9 years. So
amazing. So to circle back on your answer on, how to rebuild, how to go against the gig-based economy and go back into lifelong careers, right, that are meaningful in defense and aerospace and mobility, etc. I guess it's just being very thoughtful about your next step, right? If you're doing engineering, you do an internship. If you do an internship, you can do it in a place where it makes sense for you to then take the next step towards the company where you want to be, and so on and so forth, right?
And I think it pays to look at where you would potentially work, because if you're working for Boeing, like I work at a field office, there's room for one level advancement, and that is the site manager. That's it. if I wanted to advance and be a program manager, I've got to move. I've got to go somewhere else. And but if you go to a place like Philadelphia, where we have a factory, or St. Louis, or Seattle, if you're in one of those locations, there's so many positions. You could go there and then can work your way up. That would be, to me, for a new person, much better to go to where there's a lot of jobs. But again, you have to be willing to move to, say, Philadelphia and have your career there and live there, or Seattle, or St. Louis, or one of the places we have a lot of jobs. For us, they're all over the place, so it's finding which area, as well as internationally. So that's. But again, if you're an entry person, I think going where there's lots of positions, that's where I've seen them move up quicker, get promoted faster, than going off to where there's very few slots, and then you're forced to change companies or move anyway. So.
Makes perfect sense. Well, to wrap this up, this has been incredibly useful. So what we would like is, the way we start in our program is we have people fill in a career template sheet, which basically asks people, where do you want to be in 50 years from now, when you're giving your TED talk about your work, and then going backwards, right, to 10 years, to 5 years, to 3 years. And I think one issue is that people are expected to know all of that when they're in high school, which is extremely difficult, and also to know where they want to live, how their family is going to be like, this is.
I like the 10-year. I like one thing I had I coached jujitsu, and one of our coaches would go over this all the time. He's a real motivational speaker guy, and he's really good. He's probably one of the best coaches I've ever listened to. But he just said 10 years. He said, have a vision board. 10 years. What job do I want to have? What relationship do I want to have? What car do I want to drive? Just put all those things on. That's 10 years from now. And he said, he's like 40, but he said, yeah, so when I was 18, I had what I thought at 28 I wanted my life to be. He said, and then when you start getting close, and then as you backwards plan, you start doing the things every day that help you get to those goals, whether it be making money or whatever it is that you have on there. But then as you start to approach it, you realize you've grown and you're in a different stage of life. And so then you're like, okay, 10 years from now, where do I, and if you're doing well, you're probably getting close to having those things you want, but then you recage it and you realize, okay, well, 10 years from now, I want to be here. And so you can kind of keep doing that in steps, because 10 years is not so far. And I've used this pretty successfully with teenagers to tell them, okay, in your mind, you're 16, 26. Are you through college? You got a good job? Do you have an apartment? You got some friends? You're got your things together. You're not living at home. You're on your own. You're independent. You can travel. Okay, what could you do that gets you to that point? And maybe if you don't choose to go to university and have something marketable, it's going to be really hard unless you have another plan. Maybe you're going to start a business. I don't know. There's different ways to get there, but
super cool. Okay, so first of all, that was absolutely amazing. I learned a lot. And also we will reach out to you to help advise on the curriculum, especially for defense, but also for aerospace. And we would like to also help members, improve on the sketch that they have, right? Because aerospace and defense, they branch into many subfields, directions where this can go. This always changes. How is this going to look like in 30 years? So we would like to work on something like that with you and other colleagues and try to get towards that. But yeah, I mean, this was a huge favor to everyone else that's going to watch this video. And thank you so much, that really paid it forward.
Well, I like helping. So, I hope it's useful. And good luck to anyone who's out there trying.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day. Talk soon.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye.